Invited my ex-husband to my graduation, received obsessive backlash from his fiancée's circle, and now I'm questioning my actions. I'm a 28-year-old woman, and right after high school, I married my ex-husband, Elias, also 28, after dating for 4 years. We grew up in families that didn't have a lot, so college was out of reach for both of us unless we got creative. That's when we decided one of us would go first. We literally flipped a coin, and Elias won the toss. To make it fair, we actually wrote up a contract, by hand, because we didn't even have a printer back then, stating that no matter what happened, even if we divorced, I'd still get my turn at college. With both our families' help pitching in for tuition, books, and so on, Elias went to college locally while I worked to support our household. He graduated, and about a year later, just as I was prepping for my own college journey, life pulled a fast one on us. Elias started working full-time, and along the way, he confessed he was starting to fall for a coworker, we'll call her Lorna. Even though he said he respected and loved me enough not to act on it, we realized we probably got married too young and hadn't thought things through. We talked a lot about it. And as much as I still loved him, we both knew it was true, our marriage was rushed, and with how hectic life had become, it wasn't working anymore. We decided to split amicably. Elias insisted not to worry, our agreement was still rock solid. Both our families continued supporting me through school, and Elias even rented me an apartment near campus and covered utilities and groceries, so I could focus on my studies without needing to work. Fast forward to this year, finally, I graduated. Elias had since moved far away for work and gotten engaged to Lorna. I still lived locally for college and visited Elias's parents often, helping with chores or just keeping them company. When it came time for my graduation, the school gave me 4 tickets. A classmate who only needed 2 offered me her extras, and I realized I wanted Elias to be there. I called him and told him I had extra tickets for my graduation if he and his fiancée wanted to come. He sounded genuinely excited and immediately said yes, promising to request time off. During that call, which lasted almost an hour, he also reassured me about the apartment. He'd keep paying until I found a job. I thanked him, and we hung up. The ceremony itself was beautiful. All my loved ones were there. Afterward, my ex-in-laws took everyone out to dinner to keep the celebration going. At the restaurant, Elias's parents gave me a heartfelt gift, telling me I'd always be a daughter to them. My parents gave a present and an emotional speech. Then Elias handed me a little box with a necklace, a pendant with my initial and a tiny dragonfly. He said he'd had it custom made. I was hit with so many emotions that I just had to get up and hug everyone. When I got to Lorna, I told her I would give her a hug if she wanted. She just laughed and declined. By the time I got to Elias, he hugged me tight and said, "I'm really proud of you, Cricket," and we both laughed. He used to call me Cricket because, in his words, I never shut up. After the dinner, everyone went home. I'm sure Elias and Lorna returned to their city, but since Tuesday, I've been swamped with direct messages and texts, calling me a homewrecker, telling me to move on, accusing me of being obsessed with Elias since I haven't dated anyone since the divorce, accusing me of leeching off his kindness. Someone out there is clearly not happy with how things played out, my invitation, or our whole agreement. I don't know whether it's Lorna, her friends, or just people close to her taking matters into their own hands, but the messages are vicious, every name in the book. I talked to my parents, and they want me to tell Elias's parents so they can help end this, but I worry it would only make things worse. Honestly, I have moved on. I see Elias as my oldest friend now. The only reason I haven't dated since the divorce is because college was truly challenging, and I wanted to experience single life, get to know myself, and learn how to be on my own. I moved straight out of my parents' house and in with Elias at 18. This is the first time in my life it's just me. Now I'm thinking about changing my phone number and cutting contact, but that feels wrong because Elias is still helping me out until I find a job. I hate the idea of icing him out now. But was I really so out of line inviting him? I never thought I might be disrespecting Lorna, and now I'm second-guessing everything. I just never expected this kind of outburst over a simple invitation. Update 1. The morning after that chaotic day, I woke up still unsettled. I decided to reach out to Elias directly. I didn't want to drag his parents into this kind of petty drama, especially when I couldn't be certain that Lorna was truly behind it all. So, I texted him, told him I didn't want to make a huge scene, but since they visited, I'd been getting these offensive texts. The messages were unmistakably personal, with details about our agreement that only someone close could have known. He instantly asked me to forward the texts and the numbers. About half an hour later, he called, his voice heavy with apology. Turns out, one number was Lorna's, the others belonged to her mother and her sister. There were a couple he didn't recognize at all. He apologized again and insisted he'd handle it. I let it go for the time being. But a few hours later, a fresh WhatsApp message landed in my inbox, this time from a number I didn't know. The sender accused me of meddling in someone else's relationship, told me off for telling on her, and ranted about how I'd tried to ruin her life. I forwarded the message to Elias and blocked the number, feeling more bewildered than outraged at this point. For a while, everything went quiet. Then, just 2 days ago, I drove over to pick up Elias's parents for a mall trip, only to find Elias himself standing outside their house. Confused, I asked what was going on, but he just said we'd talk later. He tried to take his parents instead, but they flatly refused, reminding him our outing was already set and he hadn't been invited. Yesterday, Elias messaged and asked if we could talk. I agreed, but insisted on meeting in a nearby cafe rather than my apartment. Letting him in didn't seem appropriate anymore. At the cafe, he looked more serious than I'd seen in years. He said he needed to tell me something about himself and Lorna. I told him he didn't owe me explanations, it was their life, not mine. But he went on, saying he'd broken up with her. That caught me off guard. I asked, half joking, if it was because of the barrage of messages. As annoying and disrespectful as they'd been, I couldn't imagine it would push him to end a relationship. He shook his head. Not really, but it was my last straw. He told me he'd wanted to move back for ages to look after his parents, but Lorna always refused, saying she'd only move with him if he told me to back off. He couldn't do it, knowing his parents would never accept it. He explained the problems had been brewing for ages, that Lorna constantly badmouthed me and stalked my social media despite his pleas to stop. I tried to cut him off, told him he didn't have to revisit all of this, but he fell silent for a moment, then surprised me by apologizing, deeply, for our divorce. He confessed his relationship with Lorna had been off from the start, but he clung to it because he felt like he had to prove something, like if he didn't make things work, then our divorce would mean nothing. He admitted he should have fought harder for us, but was too weak and too jealous, watching his friends live so-called single dream lives while he felt stuck. Breaking up with Lorna was the only sane choice left. Apparently after my graduation, Lorna spent the entire journey home complaining, culminating by trying to destroy a delicate dragonfly figurine I'd once made Elias as an anniversary gift. I didn't even know he still had that little piece of our history. That was his breaking point. He realized then they were both simply wrecking each other's lives. I didn't really know what to say. I patted his hand, changed the subject, asked about work. He told me he'd just quit, but his supervisor offered some vacation time and asked him to reconsider, so now he's staying for the holidays. I told him not to dwell so much on the past, that moving forward was the only sane thing left to do. What else could I say to all that? Now, our families, ever the planners, seem to have decided we're all spending Christmas together. Even my sister is visiting from another city, which is nice, if a little anxiety-inducing. I guess that's where things stand for now. Final update. Christmas happened in that slow, heavy way where the whole town smells like cinnamon and wet wool. I went over early to help Elias's mom with the ham and the kind of salad that has more marshmallows than anything else. Elias showed up with a box of ornaments he'd brought back from his place. He said his mom had been asking for them, and he looked tired, but lighter, if that makes sense. He hugged his parents, then me, quick and careful. We kept busy. That helped. His dad pulled me into the garage later to show me the old handwritten contract I'd forgotten we shoved into a cookie tin years ago. He'd found it when he dug out the tree stand. The paper is yellow now, creased 1,000 different ways. He jokes he's framing it so neither of us can back out of being decent, and then he does, actually, hand me a frame at dinner. The silly thing looks official behind glass, our ugly teenage signatures and all. I laughed until I cried and then felt ridiculous for crying over our chicken scratch handwriting. Gifts were simple this year. Elias didn't bring me anything, and that was intentional. He said it with a shrug, boundaries, and I told him I appreciated that. His mom gave me a dragonfly pin she said had belonged to her sister, tiny and old-fashioned and sweet, and Elias said he had something he wanted to give me but needed to fix it first. My stomach knew what he meant before my head did. We had a weird, tender moment washing dishes, steam everywhere, radio crackling a carol that won't die, when he handed me his spare key to my apartment. He said he never used it, but he didn't like knowing he could. It felt like snapping the last thread that shouldn't have been there in the first place. I gave him back the hoodie I somehow still had from a million years ago. He laughed and said he thought that thing had vanished into a vortex. After dinner, I stepped outside to call my sister and check on her arrival time. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. It was the HR manager from a company I'd recently interviewed with. She sounded kind and a little annoyed. She told me someone had emailed the general HR inbox with concerns about your character, using my full name and a bunch of pictures from my graduation that had me circled like I was a criminal on a TV show. She made a point of saying they had already tossed it and it wouldn't affect my candidacy, but she wanted me to be aware. I knew immediately. I forwarded the email she sent me to Elias and told him I'd handle what I could on my end. He called me right away and asked if he could come by later with something. I told him yes, but to meet me at a coffee shop near my place instead of my apartment. We finished up at his parents', everyone kissed goodnight, and I drove to the cafe. He walked in holding a small box and looking angrier than I've ever seen him. He said he'd already spoken to Lorna and told her to stop. Then he opened the box and showed me the little glass dragonfly I made him years ago, the one she'd tried to smash. He'd mended the cracks with gold epoxy. The wings are veined now, tiny gold rivers through the glass. It's almost prettier for having been broken. He said, "I'm sorry I didn't protect this better, and I had to look at the ceiling for a minute so I wouldn't start all over again with the tears." I told him about the HR call. He closed his eyes and said he was done asking. He sent me a screenshot the next morning of a formal no-contact message he'd had his supervisor help him draft after HR at his work recommended it. He said he'd spoken to Lorna's mother as well. I don't know the fallout and, honestly, I don't want to. The good part, 2 days after Christmas, I got the offer. It's a junior analyst role with a lab that works with the university, but it's in another city, 2 hours away. Start date is late January. It came with enough pay that I did the math twice and then once more, then sat on the floor of my apartment because my legs forgot how to be legs. I called Elias and told him first because we had to talk logistics. I said I wanted to take the job and I'd be moving, and that he didn't need to keep paying for the apartment past the end of the month. He didn't argue. He just said, then let me cover your moving truck in January. Clean slate from February. That felt fair. I said yes. He sounded genuinely happy for me. It was weirdly easy. The day I signed the offer and emailed it back, I went over to his parents' place with bagels and told them. His mom cried in a happy way. His dad did that throat-clearing thing to hide being emotional and failed at it. They insisted on helping me pack the kitchen, his mom labeling every box like she was staging a military operation. We found the weirdest time capsule in the back of a cabinet, an old ramen pot with a burn mark shaped like a heart. Elias came by with bubble wrap and didn't stay long. He put the repaired dragonfly on my bookshelf and stood there looking at it for a moment, then looked at me and said, "I'm proud of you, Cricket," soft, like he was saying it to the room more than to me. Then he left. I changed my number that night. I emailed everyone who needed the new one, my parents, my sister, my landlords, 2 friends from school, and Elias, just in case. I kept the email brief, new number, new address to come, wishing him peace. He replied with, "Got it. I'm here if you ever need anything, but I hope you won't." I moved this past weekend. My sister and 2 classmates came to help. We made bad pizza and worse coffee on the floor of my new place. My dragonfly necklace is on a hook by the door. The glass dragonfly sits on a stack of books by the window. The framed contract is propped on my desk until I can hang it. I stood there and read it out loud to myself, everything we promised when we were kids, and then I put it down. Promise kept. Post-move, the city sounds different. My new place has a streetcar that sings a high note when it turns, like someone running a wet finger around the rim of a glass. The lab smells like ethanol and orange hand soap, and there's a freezer in the corner that hums like a small storm about to decide something. On my first day, a tech named June handed me a stack of gloves and said, "We label like we love," and I pretended that wasn't the most soothing thing I'd heard in months. We're testing water samples from 3 counties, turbidity and nitrates and a ridiculous amount of microplastics. My first spreadsheet was so ugly I wanted to apologize to it out loud, and then Dr. Han slid a mug of tea beside my keyboard and showed me a keystroke that turned all my chaos into something that looked almost like a plan. I told myself I wouldn't bring my entire old life into this apartment, but the dragonfly on the books and the framed contract on my desk made the trip without argument. I hung the necklace on a hook by the door and made myself go to bed at 10 like someone who has to wake up for a bus again. 2 days in, I figured out the coffee near the lab that doesn't taste like punishment. That evening, the receptionist waved me down with a "sorry, you're needed upstairs" voice, and I thought, okay, maybe I forgot to initial something. It was HR, and the woman waiting in the conference room had tired eyes and a beautiful scarf. She told me, gently, they had received an anonymous email accusing me of ethics violations and compromising relationships, with attachments I recognized from graduation, arrows and circles doing Olympic routines. "We've already disregarded it," she said, "but I want you to know, and I want you to feel safe coming to us." I had my folder. I don't even know when I became a folder person, but there it was in my tote, printouts of the texts, the numbers, the no contact message. The campus legal clinic sits in a renovated brownstone that smells like old gum and new carpet. A student attorney with a haircut sharp enough to open packages took my statement and explained the kind of order I could ask for in this state, how screenshots turn into exhibits, how service works when you don't share a city. I thought my hands would shake when I signed. They didn't. I went to the grocery store after and bought an absurdly bright bag of clementines because it felt like the right kind of rebellious. The order came through faster than I expected, and I forwarded a copy to HR at the lab, to the university address, and to Elias. He replied one line back, "Good." A few days later, a county clerk called to confirm service had been made on a Ms. with the right last name and a mother who argued on her porch for 20 minutes about how keys fit into locks. I rested my forehead against the cabinet door and let the relief wash through me like somebody had finally shut a window. The quiet that followed had weight in it, but not the bad kind. I fell into a rhythm. June and I got good at working around each other's elbows. On Thursdays we go outside with our lunches if the sun even pretends to show up, and last week, a kid on a bike stopped and asked what we did in that building that sounds like a dentist. June told him we made sure kids downriver had water safe enough to brush their teeth in the first place. The boy nodded like he'd been waiting for that answer his whole life and rode off, seat too low, knees too high, a flash of red backpack and joy. On a rainy Saturday, I got a call from Elias's mom that started with "I have a harebrained idea," which is her way of saying she's already baked a casserole for it. She asked if I could come home the next weekend, not for anything dramatic, for a short afternoon at the library. She and Elias's dad and my parents wanted to meet me there. I asked if everything was okay, and she said, "Better than okay, I think." All my insides turned into an orchestra tuning. We met in the old room with the windows that rattle if a bus idles outside. They'd pushed 2 tables together and there were 2 staplers like a vision board for adulthood. Elias was there, hands in his jacket pockets, face clean-shaven in a way that made him look like the kid I used to trade notes with. He didn't hug me. We didn't need that. There was a woman in a polo with a community college logo and a man with a name tag that said Youth Outreach, and a girl with a high ponytail and a band hoodie who looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. Elias's dad cleared his throat and failed to hide it, again, and put the framed contract gently in the middle like we were about to summon an ancient spirit. He said there was a little money left in the earmarked account that had been paying my rent, that he and Elias had both been tossing in whatever they could over the last year, nervous and stubborn, and now it could stop being a parachute and be a bridge. They'd spoken with the community college down the road, the same one he'd started at, the same one I almost did. The outreach coordinator had found a student, a first-gen kid trying to pick up night classes while working at her aunt's store. Books are expensive. Lab fees are mean. Could we do something small and real? The girl with the high ponytail looked at the corner of the contract like it might bite. They asked me if I wanted to name it. I laughed, then felt ridiculous, then said, "Can we just call it the Tin Cookie Fund?" And explained about the cookie tin where that ridiculous contract had lived, under a lid with little holly berries and a dent from when it fell off a shelf in our first apartment. The lady from the college said she liked that very much. We signed some papers. They took a high-resolution scan of the contract and gave me the original back. The student's name is Maribel, and she wants to be a respiratory therapist because her older brother has asthma and she got good at counting his breaths when he was little. We walked her across the street to the bookstore and watched her pick out a stack like a tower she was going to learn to climb. She kept flicking the corner of one with her fingernail like she didn't believe a thing could be hers. Elias stood a little apart while we waited at the register. We were 2 people in line, holding space, not history. He said, "It's nice out," and it was, the kind of sharp cold that makes you feel honest. I looked at him and said, "Thank you," because I didn't know how to say a million other things without making it complicated. He nodded. On our way out, Maribel glanced at the frame in my tote and asked what it was, like a kid who wants to understand why adults are weepy over paper. I told her we wrote each other a promise once, and that it didn't look pretty, but it worked. She asked if she could see it sometime, and I told her sure, after her first quiz. She grinned and said, "Bet." The crazy part, if there is one, came later, subtle as a tripwire. A brown envelope showed up at my apartment with no return address, heavy like a book. I carried it to the kitchen because kitchens feel like truth rooms. Inside was a slim, spiral-bound thing with a cover that said, "Mutual aid and micro-commitments, case studies and informal contracts." It was from a sociology grad at the university who apparently had heard about 2 kids and a cookie tin through the outreach coordinator and wanted to include it in a research project. They'd anonymized names. They'd already done the IRB approvals. All they wanted was permission to reproduce the scan of our contract with our signatures blurred, to talk about how communities get each other through when institutions don't. I read it twice at the counter eating clementines. The dragonfly on my bookshelf caught the afternoon and threw gold onto my ceiling. I emailed back and said yes, with one condition, that they include links to the Community College Emergency Fund and the Tin Cookie Fund. They wrote back that they already had. The order worked. There have been no more emails, no more anonymous arrows and circles, no cars idling where they shouldn't. I take the streetcar in the mornings and sometimes a man in a hat tells me facts about pigeons, and sometimes June sends me a photo of a spreadsheet that only we would find thrilling. Elias texted once to say his mom wanted to mail me a recipe card and could he confirm my address. I sent it back with a smiley face made of colons and parentheses because being silly is safer than being sentimental. He replied with a thumbs up and nothing else. That's what a clean edge looks like. I put the scan of our contract in a simple frame and hung it in the lab above my desk with a small label Dr. Hahn type that just says cookie tin. When I showed June, she snorted and said, "You nerd," with the kind of affection that lands light. After lunch, we went out back and watched real dragonflies over the retention pond. January lies sometimes, and I thought about gold seams holding broken edges together, about water you can see through, about promises that did more than just keep one person afloat. It turns out a thing can be over and still grow roots somewhere else. It turns out that sometimes the most interesting part of a story is what you do when the credits roll. Another update. Spring didn't arrive so much as slink in under the door, leaving a damp line on my doormat and a row of ants that looked like punctuation deciding what kind of sentence the day would be. At the lab, the freezer sounded like it had switched allegiances to thunder, and June was already in my chair because the county had called before sunrise. Storm all night, creek up over its banks, something ugly coming off a little plastics place out past the feed store. We pulled samples in rain that felt needle thin and alive, the kind that finds the seam between your glove and your sleeve no matter how cocky you are about tape. I've never loved fluorescent lights until I watched them wake up the room one by one as we staggered in with coolers, water sloshing like a bad dream you tell yourself not to forget. By mid-morning the numbers said what our noses already knew. It wasn't a scare the children crisis, but it was a you shouldn't be making baby formula with that kind of day. Dr. Hahn took the call to the county and I took the one to a church basement where somebody had dragged out a crackling mic and a folding table and a pot of coffee that could strip paint. People showed up in damp coats, Faces I recognized from the streetcar and the grocery line. Boil water? A woman with a toddler asked, hip cocked like she'd been standing brave for years. Boiling won't help for this one, I said, and I watched the way the words landed. Filters, bottled for the next couple days. We'll post the drop sites. June, bless her, had already texted the list to my phone. A kid standing by the exit, the same red backpack as before, knees still too high for that bike, raised his hand and asked if the fish were okay. I told him they were cranky, not doomed. The room exhaled like we'd all been holding the same breath. Back at the lab we ran until my eyes blurred numbers into rain. I opened the door to get a lungful of cool and found 3 cases of water stacked against the wall with a note wedged under the top shrink wrap, for whoever makes sure my sink stops smelling like coins. It was signed with a doodle that looked suspiciously like a dragonfly, or maybe that's just what my brain turns kindness into now. That same week, the sociology grad with the spiral-bound project wrote to say the department wanted to put together a small panel on mutual aid and weird little promises that work. I asked Dr. Hahn if I could duck out early for it and she said, go make it count, like she'd been waiting to say that to somebody all semester. The panel was in an old lecture hall where all the chairs squeak in unison if anyone laughs. The other speakers were a guy who runs a tool library out of his garage and a nurse who organizes a ride share for prenatal appointments. They put up a slide with our contract blurred just enough that if you squinted, you could still see how ugly our signatures were. I thought I'd be cool. I was not cool. I sounded like a person trying not to cry in a library, which, to be fair, I now have experience doing. Afterward, a girl with blue hair and chipped nail polish touched the frame and asked if it felt heavy to carry something like that. I told her it felt like carrying a map someone else drew with a crayon, and she laughed and put a cupcake on my lap like we were friends who did this kind of thing all the time. On a bright Saturday that smelled like damp mulch and hot dogs even though it was barely noon, we did our first tin cookie fun day in the library meeting room with the rattly windows. No balloons, nobody cutting ribbons, just a folding table with a sign I made too big because I forgot how big letters are once you've committed to the first one. Maribel showed up with a stack of syllabi that looked like a small city skyline and a highlighter army in her backpack. Her aunt came too and tried to pay us back with a bag of pan dulce that almost made me cry because it's hard to explain how much it means to be fed on purpose. Elias's parents came with a shoebox full of pens and a ledger like it was 1953 in the best way. My parents, who pretend they don't like fanfare, wore their good shoes and pulled out a tiny cash jar they'd labeled "Oh no" and I didn't ask and also I didn't need to. Elias came late, carrying a textbook that had his name scrawled on the foredge from a lifetime ago and a roll of blue painter's tape stuck to his wrist like a bracelet. He'd been at his parents' house fixing the wobbly railing. We didn't hug, we didn't touch, we didn't do the awkward almost. He slid the physics book onto the pile and I watched a kid in a hoodie lift it like it was Excalibur, eyes huge. We stood next to each other and talked about whether the high school shop class could build a couple more folding carts for the next swap. He said he'd ask. We both looked relieved when the youth outreach guy came over to talk logistics because sometimes the best kindness is an exit line. The wildest left turn didn't feel wild when it started. Another storm, this one clean and loud, and then a sinkhole took a bite out of the streetcar line a block from my apartment like a cartoon. The city rerouted buses and everyone in my building came out to stand with their arms crossed. Neighbor theater, while a backhoe did a delicate dance. A foreman with a clipboard the size of a TV asked if the lab could prioritize the samples from the hole because there was a suspicion of an old, capped, line that wasn't so capped after all. I said yes before I remembered I don't technically get to say yes for us, then called Dr. Hahn, who laughed and said, that's exactly what I would have said, which felt like being handed a slightly too big coat and told to grow into it. We found what we needed to find. Not a disaster, not a movie explosion, but enough that the city corrected something that had quietly been wrong for years. The local paper ran a photo of the hole and a quote from me talking about seeing what you can't see with math and patience, which made June spit coffee and say I sounded like a PBS show. When the line reopened, the streetcar engineer dinged the bell 3 times as he rolled past the lab and everyone on the platform clapped like you do when a pilot lands in ugly weather. It was silly, and it mattered. Somewhere in there, life kept being life. Elias texted to ask if I knew a decent carpenter. His mom wanted a ramp on the back steps before summer. I sent him the number of a guy my landlord uses who shows up when he says he will and leaves less sawdust than you'd think. He replied with a thanks, period, and a day later a picture of the ramp with his dad standing on it like a ship's captain, grinning. That night, his mom called me with harebrained idea number 2. She'd drafted a little note to slip into borrowed textbooks with a QR code for the Tin Cookie Fund and wanted to know if QR code was something you had to feed. I walked her through it over the phone while stirring pasta, the sound of her satisfaction clicking into place when it scanned like the world's smallest jackpot. The order kept working. Silence that wasn't ominous, just empty of the wrong kind of noise. The legal clinic emailed to say the file was quietly aging toward the day it would be something we once did, not something we still had to tend. I put their email in my folder and then, because I'm a person who needs something small to hold onto when big things float away, I bought a magnet at the farmer's market shaped like a cookie tin and stuck it to my fridge and told myself it was for grocery lists even though I knew it was a talisman pretending to be useful. Last week, the community college called and asked if I could come say 2 minutes worth of words to a room of new night students about choosing good people to hold you up. I wore the shirt that makes me feel like my shoulders are in the right place. The room smelled like whiteboard cleaner and somebody's onion sandwich, and the kind of tired that means you're trying. Maribel sat near the back, hair braided tight, and when I said that promises can look like paperwork or casseroles or used textbooks with 3 different colors of highlighter in them, she nodded like she'd invented nodding. After, a student in scrubs stopped me and said, "My kitchen has one of those tins," and I said, "Mine too," and she laughed like she was letting me in on a secret. On the way home, the streetcar sang that high note at the turn like a glass rim in a storm. I unlocked my door and the apartment smelled like orange hand soap and dust. The dragonfly on my bookshelf had found late sun and thrown it onto the ceiling like a signal. There was a bubble mailer on the mat with no return address, and I stood for a second with my hand on it like you do with something that might be a letter and might be a mirror. Inside was a small, heavy thing wrapped in thrifted tissue paper with stars on it. The note said, "For the tin cookie table, no need to write back." It was a stamp, old and wooden, the kind that used to belong to offices that only existed between 9 and 5. The rubber said, in tiny block letters, "Promise kept." I laughed and made a sound that was almost a sob and stamped it on the edge of a scrap envelope just to watch it appear, neat and square. It looked official. It also looked like exactly the kind of small, ridiculous magic that makes a town work. I don't know if any of this is crazy in the headline sense. Nobody confessed on a rooftop. Nobody ran through an airport. But yesterday, June and I ate lunch on the loading dock and watched real dragonflies skim the surface of the retention pond like they were signing their names over and over on something the sky needed us to see. For a second I had this dumb, fierce thought that this is how you win, by showing up with a cooler and a map and a stamp that says what you did and then doing it again. Elias sent me a photo of his mom at the top of the new ramp holding a pie aloft like a trophy, and I sent back a thumbs up and nothing else. A clean edge can be warm too. The panel posted a recording, and at the end you can hear chairs squeak and someone say cookie tin like a benediction. I went home and labeled a box we keep under the tin cookie table with a piece of masking tape. "Emergency," I wrote, and then, because June's right, we label like we love, I added "good trouble only." The ink feathered a little because the tape was dusty. It still read as true.